Sweet! New Helluva Boss short is out. The show is not perfect by a long shot, but it's been pleasantly surprising me lately with the newer episodes and seems to be on a general upward trend in terms of writing quality. Can't wait to see where they take it this time. Oh. Oh. Oh no. It would be difficult to find an indie animation showrunner more polarizing than one Viviane Madrano. On one end of the spectrum, you have people convinced that everything she touches is solid gold, and that even slightly criticizing her work makes you the human avatar of homophobia and a prudish buzzkill. I'm sure this video will earn me a few in my comment section. On the other end, you have people who think even passively enjoying any project she breathed in the vicinity of makes you a barely sapient, backwards troglodyte. Somewhere in the middle of that spectrum, you'll find people like me, people who think that Vivzy Pop projects have a lot of solidly good reasons to like them, but just as much room for critique. Repeating myself, I must clarify that I am not a die-hard hater of Helluva Boss. I'm not going to be making some sort of sweeping, generalized judgment on the show's artistic merit. That would be unfair to it, especially considering I haven't even finished it. I'm not quite caught up to the latest episodes. Nevertheless, the particular issue I have with the show is when I'm going to spend this video digging my little fingies into to try and discuss in a reasonable, good faith manner. The issue in question is... This is a criticism leveled at Vivzy Pop's work, all the time, and it's very clear to see where that comes from, sadly. Female characters in Helluva Boss can often feel flat and undeveloped, their storylines and development shafted in favor of that of their male counterparts. Their actions and motivations tend to not be treated as charitably or as equally important as those of the men. To pick an example, the episode X's and Ooze features a married couple who happen to share a mutual ex that was shitty to them both. The show barely seems interested in exploring that potentially very fascinating dynamic at all. The episode focuses almost entirely on Moxie's relationship with Chaz and doesn't even spend a full minute on his relationship with Millie. Another potential example is the show's characterization of Stolas' wife and eventual ex-wife, Stella Goetia. She is almost entirely two-dimensional, serving nothing outside the role of being the bitchy, screeching, poor-hating nag that makes Stolas' life a living hell. The show has absolutely no desire to give her more than a puddle's worth of depth, going so far as to imply that she was just awful like that since she was a child. This is such squandered potential, and as Twitter user @JokersJust points out, Stolas wasn't the only one forced into an unhappy marriage with no consent. Stella is a woman in a patriarchal setting that robs her of any and all chances for autonomy and self-sufficiency, and the show completely ignores that in favor of focusing on her husband's issues. The show is also very comfortable with throwing around sexist insults towards its women, bitch, whore, slut, etc., but I suppose that could be excused by the major premise of all the main characters being born and raised in literal hell. But that excuse feels really old and worn out by the millionth time you've heard Blitz call a woman out of her name every time she stands in any form of opposition to him. Now, I don't think the show is intentionally being misogynistic, the creator being a woman who makes jokes about the misogyny of the industry she's in all the time. But being a woman doesn't exempt you from being misogynistic, even accidentally. I think what's going on here is that the show's creators have been subjected their entire lives to this cosmic background radiation of misogyny, a side effect of living in a misogynistic society. The more academic term for this kind of phenomenon is hegemony, the dominance of one social group over another, often supported by legitimating norms and ideas. Essentially, it's just there so long that you pick up parts of it without realizing that they're there because they just feel normal. When hateful ideas about women are the norm in your society, you passively absorb them without thinking, not even noticing they're there, and then they tend to pop up in your creative work. The particular instance of misogyny in Helluva Boss that ticked me off bad enough to make this video was the treatment of one... It probably wouldn't be all that controversial to say that Wea Boo Boo is probably the worst of the Helluva Boss shorts, and with good reason. The video forces you to fight through layers upon layers of sexually charged secondhand embarrassment just to get through it, making everyone watching it feel like their flesh is trying to crawl right off their bones. However, one of the biggest reasons I personally disliked the short was this feeling of ennui, a deep boredom with everything about the character put in front of me. My first thought when confronted with Emberlynn and her weird behavior was, wait, haven't I seen this somewhere before? The stalker, creepy weirdo fan who writes gross and icky fanfics in their room is an archetype that feels done to death already, and it's rare when a show does anything interesting or good with it. Other shows have done it what feels like a million times. And notice how most of the examples I just provided you with were women. Emberlynn is just a new link in a long chain of nerdy fangirls being the writer's chew toy, an acceptable target to point fun at, and they invite the audience to join in. Even if Emberlynn is Spindlehorse trying to poke good-natured fun at its own audience, which it has done before, it falls completely on its face because you're not supposed to be laughing with Emberlynn in a hee hee, she just like me for real, I'm a freak like that kind of way. She, like the others, is someone you're supposed to be laughing at. Sarah is actually partially an exception. The shippening episode is a loving and caring tribute from the Amazing World of Gumball team to its fans that's still silly enough to laugh at. Emberlynn is supposed to gross you out, to make you cringe. Look at this loser. She's a 20-something college student who still lives with her parents who hate her. Don't look at the housing market or rent prices. She's horny for monsters and likes weird porn and sex. Don't look at what the male heroes happily do to each other. Her fanfiction is weird and horny and we should all laugh at her. Ignore the fact that at the time of writing this, there are well over 16,000 fan works for the show on AO3 alone that the fans watching this short busted their asses working on, almost 4,000 of which are explicit. She even attempts to sexually proposition the main character who just broke in through her window. Ignore the fact that that's literally the catalyst that kicked off the main relationship of the show. Emberlynn hasn't really done much wrong, at the very least, nothing the show doesn't excuse or completely exonerate other characters for, and yet the show expects you to engage with her with the same vitriol you do with this guy. This makes her whole character feel, at least to me, like a misogynistic caricature, a tired, boring one that I can't help but roll my eyes at. Emberlynn Pinkle is not some silly, tongue-in-cheek little gaffe at fan culture and how wacky it can be. She's a punching bag that the writers set up and expect us to swing on with full force. Now that I'm done, at least for now, whining about Emberlynn's writing, I'd like to pivot your focus to the second catalyst for this video, a character called... If you don't know what Hunter the Parenting is, I don't blame you. It's an obscure indie animation project made by Ogre Poppenang Productions, an animation studio with only 9 permanent employees. The episodes are posted on the channel of Bruva Alphabusa, the project's lead. To explain HTP, I need to explain a little about him first. Art is nothing without its context, after all. Alphabusa's most famous work is If the Emperor Had a Text-to-Speech Device, a comedy web series based around the lore and set in the universe of the Warhammer 40,000 tabletop games. Think of like a long-running comedy crackfic with visuals and voice acting. This series is a true gem and funny as hell. It ended up getting loads of new people invested in Warhammer 40k, and I feel like half of the fandom's inside jokes can be traced back to here. However, because of the endless march of capitalism slowly but surely hurtling mankind over the edge of a cliff, not every beautiful thing is made to last. In 2021, Games Workshop, the company that owns Warhammer 40,000, went full Anne Rice and declared a no-tolerance policy for fan animation projects. Not wanting to be served a cease and desist, Alphabusa put TTS on indefinite hiatus, and the project hasn't been continued since. But, like a volcanic eruption leaves behind enriched soil, fertile and ready for the growth of something new, Alphabusa was granted the opportunity for a new project, an even better one that took the comedic strengths of TTS and was able to build on top of them, able to balance out the wacky hijinks with genuinely heart-wrenching emotional beats and sincere storytelling. And that project was Hunter the Parenting. Like its predecessor, Hunter the Parenting is based in a pre-existing fictional setting, specifically the universe of the World of Darkness games. The World of Darkness games are a series of TTRPGs that all exist in the same universe. This edgy, gothic, urban fantasy setting with secret societies and monstrous creatures skulking about in the unknown gloom. Each game allows you to play as a different aspect of this world, be it a vampire, werewolf, changeling, demon, mage, etc. The games include Werewolf the Apocalypse, Mage the Ascension, and others, but the most famous one is Vampire the Masquerade, where the character you create and play as you guessed it, a vampire. Hunter the Parenting is a series that takes place in this world of darkness, and the name of the show is a pun on the name of the World of Darkness game, Hunter the Reckoning. In Hunter the Reckoning, you play as an ordinary human who has just become aware of the horrifying mysteries that lurk in the dark recesses of your formerly ordinary life, and been forced to fight back against the monsters threatening the world. Hunter the Parenting focuses on a family of hunters who, led by their patriarch, Big D, yes, that's his actual name as far as we know, hunt the supernatural. Hunter the Parenting doesn't have the copyright issues that TTS does, because it was made with explicit permission from the IP holders. Speaking of IP issues, I like to imagine that, however unlikely, some GW suit is molding because several of the Hunter the Parenting characters are very clearly based on the Warhammer 40,000 characters as depicted in TTS, to the point of actually having the same voice actors, but not in a way that any lawyer could do anything about. Magnus the Red, nah, we got Marcus, who's a redhead. Now, I seem to have drifted pretty far off my original topic, so I'd like to pivot your attention to the Hunter the Parenting character I mentioned previously, Grimmel Smith. Grimmel, known mostly by her nickname Grimmel, is like Emberlynn in a lot of ways. They're both women who happen to be big weebs. Grimmel is also a bit of a horn dog, with a penchant for yaoi, to the point where she even carries around a yaoi paddle. The series takes place in 2006 for context, that she will happily use as a weapon to shatter the tailbones of her enemies with. Also similar to Emberlynn, her comedy stems from her being this sort of familiar source of secondhand embarrassment, from the broken Japanese she uses in everyday speech to her being the type of person who insists that dubbed anime is inferior to the freaking yaoi paddle. But there are some key differences between Grimmel Smith and Emberlynn Pinkle, and they lie in how the show treats and expects us to engage with them. Emberlynn Pinkle is a joke character, first and foremost. She has pretty much nothing else going on for her. Unless I'm proven wrong at a later date, Emberlynn's only purpose to the story is to make Blitz, and by extension the audience, uncomfortable. She doesn't have any interactions or meaningful relationships with other characters, not even her own parents. This is all that she is. Grimmel is more than this. She is a member of the Arcanum, an organization dedicated to the study of supernatural phenomena, and is passionate enough about that to be willing to climb through the chapter house vents to listen to the senior members discuss topics she, as a junior member, isn't allowed to learn about yet. She's a close and dependable friend to Marcus, and is willing to brandish her weapon against his bullies. She's also exes with Marcus's fiancée, Kitten, and has deep regrets about the bad terms they're still stuck on. She's also got self-esteem issues, anger issues, and to put it simply, Grimmel offers more to the narrative and the audience to engage with than secondhand embarrassment. Now, there's nothing wrong with having one-off joke characters, but what could have saved Emberlynn from coming across the way that she did was giving her more to work with, story-wise. I mean, there's potential. How did her parents react when they found their daughter, who they were just complaining about, by the way, dead on the floor of her room with a stab wound to the chest, with no clues as to who did it? She could be a potential foil to Stolas, as they acted in similar ways when they first met Blitz, but got very different reactions from him. There's just so many more interesting and less misogynistic ways to engage with a cringy fangirl nerd stock character than this. Mean-spirited comedy is a little bit hard to define. The term mean-spirited itself, as defined by the Britannica Dictionary, means feeling or showing a cruel desire to cause harm or pain. Working off that, the definition of mean-spirited comedy I'm going to use is when the comedy is derived from being cruel. You, as the audience, are expected to laugh along and agree with the mean jokes made at the character's expense. Looking at Helluva Boss, which loves to make incredibly mean jokes at its character's expense, it's easy to tell that this sense of humor tends to suggest a mean spirit. There's nothing wrong with mean-spirited comedy in and of itself. A lot of classic and beloved comedy shows, like It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, do it, and shows like The Simpsons utilize this comedy style all the time. But with a show like Helluva Boss that already has issues aside from the comedy and how it treats its female characters, piling on that extra layer of mean jokes is going to make those problems a lot worse and a lot more obvious. Hunter the Parenting has a very different comedic style than Helluva Boss. It does like to make fun of its characters quite a bit, and make its sex jokes, like a lot, most of them at the expense of the weirdly inappropriate sounding names of British towns and streets, but that's not all it does. There's a lot of slapstick and physical comedy, comedy derived from the art style and animation itself. I could just go on forever with all the different ways in which it's funny. I nearly die laughing every time I watch the show. And when the humor does get to insults and mockery, it doesn't feel nearly as nasty as when Helva Boss does it. With Grimmel in particular, her weirdo behavior is, at least to me, endearing. Grimmel isn't supposed to gross you out. She's supposed to remind you of someone. Maybe people you've met at a convention or at the high school anime club, or even your younger self. Someone you can look back on with a smile and not a grimace. Okay, maybe a little grimace. But the show does something similar with the other characters, which brings me to my next point. Most of the cast of Hunter the Parenting is male. The family it centers around is all dudes, 3 out of which are confirmed queer dudes, but still dudes. But what's more important in determining how misogynistic a show is or isn't is looking at how the show treats its male and female characters. From what I've seen, Hunter the Parenting, at least in terms of how it does comedy, paints its characters with a very even brush, regardless of their gender. The show will make cracks about Dr. Waters' cocaine habit and make jokes about Big D and his DMT. The show also makes fun of Grimmel about as much and in similar ways as it does Marcus. It will make jokes about her weebiness and his nerdiness, often at the same time. The only thing the show really does differently with Grimmel is have the other characters bully her for being enough of a weeb that she believes in Quajin, which is more out of a disrespect to the concept of Quajin in general. For the context, Quajin are the vampires of the East in some editions of Vampire the Masquerade. Their writing feels grossly Orientalist and like a mishmash of the folklore of multiple Asian countries without actually understanding any of them, and there's a reason they're not really present in later editions. So the Quajin thing is less about Grimmel being dumb and more about the show wanting nothing to do with them. Let's look back at Emberlynn. The show is way harsher on her for what she does than it is on the mostly male characters who have done the same stuff, if not worse. Let's see, she's sexually deviant. That's something cringe and lame. Wait, what about the actual living embodiment of the sin of lust who sells these things? No, no, it's cool when he does it. She assumes Blitz is here to smash and acts accordingly. That's something to stab her over. Wait, Stolas did the exact same thing? And Stolitz is the flagship of the show? You see where I'm going with this. Helva Boss is unfair to all of its female characters, and they make that very obvious with poor Emberlynn. Hunter the Parenting treats its male and female characters, especially with this particular type of fandomy, geeky humor, in a lot of the same ways, and nowhere is that more evident than when you compare any episode with Grimmel in it to my personal favorite episode of the show. In general, Hunter the Parenting is just a very geeky sort of show. I mean, it's based off of a series of fantasy tabletop RPGs. What did you expect? It's full of pop culture references, often to video games and anime, and you get the sense that the creators are involving a lot of their own personal experiences and nostalgia in the script. I mean, one of the writers and voice actors is literally called Nostalgia, and I love her. This means that the show handles this kind of humor with not only a gender egalitarian method, but a very gentle, loving one. And the show kind of epitomizes that in chapter 3.8, Half Demon, All Hunter, Boy Story. To sum it up, the youngest member of the family, 11-year-old Boy, yes, his name is Boy, like that's probably the name on his birth certificate, reads aloud the story he wrote about his OCs and has his family act out the roles. As you can expect, this episode is such a lethal dose of secondhand embarrassment that it feels almost masochistic to watch, and I loved every second. The story is such an accurate representation of what a geeky little 11-year-old would write that I'm convinced that the writers were just going through their old middle school notebooks and pulling from them. And that is what makes the episode so great. It is impossible for me to hate anything about Boy's Story. It's edgelordy, cliche, clumsily written with poor grammar, and I adore it. That's how I used to write at that age. And the show itself seems to agree with my assessment. No one in Boy's family teases or bullies him about his story. His grandpa, Big D, is his biggest hype man, and everyone else is offering the gentlest, most loving, constructive criticism possible. I know this is partially because Boy is an adorable child and being a dick about the story he poured his heart and soul into would go beyond the limits of mean spirited comedy and straight into fucking unwatchable asshole behavior territory, but I think the handling of Boy Story's comedic potential points to a general trend in HTP's writing that I think is a generally better direction than how Helva Boss handled Emberlynn. Boy's Story isn't supposed to make you laugh and go, ew. It's supposed to make you laugh and go, aww. It's bad in the same way that the crayon drawing your baby cousin made of you is. It's bad in the way the doodles in your elementary school diary are. I don't think the show wants you to feel any particular way about Grimmel. A lot of fans can't stand her. But what the show does seem to want for you is to seriously engage emotionally in some way with her. She's not supposed to gross you out like Emberlyn is. She's like that one weird friend you have and genuinely enjoy getting into long, spirited debates with about the dynamic between Naruto and Sasuke. She's supposed to be the character you're interested and invested in, someone you want to work out her differences with her ex, to have better self esteem, to learn more about the supernatural and vampires, and maybe stop believing in Quajin at some point, to have a satisfying and cathartic character arc. With Emberlyn, the story wants you not to care about her. It wants you to see her as only good for a few laughs, and that's it. It wants you to care so little about her that you don't feel bad when Blitz kills her. I think that about sums up my feelings on the matter. I don't have much else to add, so I'm just going to shamelessly promote Hunter the Parenting now. I cannot recommend the series enough. The writing, the animation, the character design, every aspect is fantastic, and the story will have you go from laughing your lungs inside out to crying out your tear ducts dry in seconds, and every voice actor is giving a stellar performance. The series link is in the description, as well as the creator's Patreon. It's an indie project with a tiny team, and they need all the funding they can get. I also recommend the show to any Helva Boss fans, even the ones I may have upset with the contents of this video. Once again, I'm not here to tell you how to feel about Helva Boss and that it's trash and that HTP is superior. Although I do prefer HTP, that is just my own personal preference. I just think everyone should watch the show. It's really good. Thanks for listening, and subscribe if you want to hear any other rants I might cook up in the future. I also want to take this opportunity to apologize for the kind of crappy audio quality here because I don't actually own a microphone. I'm just recording this with my laptop. I recorded half the video on the floor of my house's pantry and the other half in my room. And this is my first ever video. Hopefully further videos will be improved in quality and won't have a lot of the audio issues that this one does. And maybe by that point I'll be able to afford a real microphone. Thank you for listening.